Hello all, and welcome to the closing session on day 4 of the 2021 Virginia Highway Safety Summit. I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please remain muted for the duration of the session. We want to avoid background noises that could potentially interrupt our speakers. Secondly, please place all questions in the chat box. Our moderator will be monitoring the chat box and we will conduct a Q&A at the end of the session. Lastly, you have free control of your viewing mode. You can change the viewing mode at the top of your screen. It defaults to View Everyone. We recommend changing that viewing mode to Who's Talking so you are focused on the speaker. As a final quick note, we will be recording the session and will be sending out all the presentations once the summit is over. With that, I will now turn it over to moderator, Mr. George Bishop. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the final day, the final session of the 2021 Virtual Highway Safety Summit. And I think it's been an exciting few days with a real variety of informative sessions and a diverse collection of topics and really knowledgeable group of panelists. So I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I have. We're going to bring this year's summit to a close today with this session, and we're going to take the opportunity to look back at 2020 as a means for us to focus on the way forward, the path that we're going to take together as highway safety professionals to achieve zero fatalities on Virginia's roads. Now, to achieve this, we need to strengthen even further the partnership between law enforcement, nonprofits, state agencies, institutes of higher education, and our local communities. And it's through the solidarity of these strong connections that we're going to continue to present a united front, strong enough to overcome any of the challenges that may face us. Obviously, we're going to continue to focus on the 4 E's, educating our residents, enforcing the laws, improving our infrastructure through engineering, and supporting our emergency medical service professionals as they save lives. And we're going to do all of this with an emphasis on equity, the 5th E of highway safety. Equity, diversity, and inclusion are the overarching themes that connect the 4 E's in our highway safety plan and ensure our messaging resonates with all residents, regardless of background. In our final panel today, we're going to be exploring the evolution of the 4 E's and how they can help us build the highway safety system of the future as informed by our experiences in 2020. And I'd like to start off by introducing our panel members for this morning's discussion. To discuss our first E, engineering, we're thrilled to have Mark Cole with us today. Mark is a state traffic engineer with Virginia Department of Transportation and leads VDOT's highway safety programs. For over 2 decades, Mark has held several leadership positions with state and local transportation departments in Virginia and North Carolina, with focus on planning, design, and construction of transportation projects that serve all modes of transportation. His specific areas of professional interest and passion include traffic safety, urban street design, and transportation program and project management. Mark holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from North Carolina State University and a Master's of Public Administration from Old Dominion University. He's a professional engineer in Virginia and North Carolina and is an ITE Fellow. After Mark, we have with us today to discuss law enforcement, Henrico County Chief of Police, Eric English. Chief English was a member of the Richmond Police Department for approximately 29 years, with the last 7.5 of those years as deputy chief. He retired from Richmond in September of 2018, only to assume the role of Chief of Police with Harrisonburg Police Department, where he maintained that role until September of 2020. He was then appointed to his current role as Chief of Police for Henrico County. Chief English is a graduate of the University of Richmond and received his master's degree from VCU. Welcome, Chief English. After Chief English, I will then introduce to you Dia Gainor, who will discuss EMS post-care. Dia is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Emergency Medical Services Officials. NASMO members are state agencies that regulate and support emergency medical services through the safe systems element of post-crash care and trauma systems. She presently serves on the Road to Zero steering group, the FHWA Traffic Incident Management Executive Leadership Group representing EMS, and she was the primary contributor to the EMS chapter in the Towards Zero Deaths National Strategy. Dia is also a recipient of the NHTSA Administrator's Public Service Award for outstanding national leadership in enhancing the collaboration among highway safety, public health, transportation, and emergency medical services. Welcome, Dia. And finally, to discuss education and media outreach, we are pleased to have with us Carson Goodrich. Carson is an account supervisor at NDP, where she successfully leads and manages various campaigns across Virginia clients. She is devoted to both her client relationships and to generating strong results with her NDP team. Carson is a graduate of Elon University with a major in strategic communications and a minor in digital art. Now, each of our panelists have prepared presentations for you this morning, after which we will engage in a conversation, hopefully organic in nature, guided also, we hope, by your questions. We have a variety of talented and knowledgeable individuals that I just introduced to you with us today, and we hope that you're going to take the opportunity that you have to engage them in a discussion about your thoughts, your ideas, questions, topics, and concerns. We're going to have about 25 to 30 minutes for this final portion of our session. So please, as Casey indicated, utilize the chat feature here in GoToMeeting to post your questions or comments. I will be monitoring the chat room and will pose your questions for you to our panelists at that time. All right, so let's get started with the presentations, and we will begin by hearing from Mark Cole with VDOT. Mark, take it away.
All right, thank you, George, very much. Always glad to be with you today and looking forward to this conversation. All right, so I'm going to be talking about 2020 and beyond from an engineering perspective, and just a few observations that I've noticed based on some of the data we've collected over the past year plus. And so what you see here is traffic volume changes in the state since the end of 2019 through a couple weeks ago. So you can see that big drop around March or April of 2020 of almost 50%. And then traffic has come back trying to get closer to where it was before the pandemic. But what you can see on this slide with our various VDOT districts shown is that not all the districts have returned to the 2019 traffic levels as you might expect. So the yellow line at the bottom is our Northern Virginia district, our most urban district. And you can see that it's still about 10% below the traffic levels we were seeing before the pandemic started. And then at the top, some of our rural districts like Bristol in the blue, they've already met or exceeded those pre-pandemic traffic volumes. And if we look at the same information in a different way, but look at it as rural roads versus urban roads, you can see that our rural roads, especially our interstates, have gotten back to 2019 traffic volume levels, or in the case of rural interstates, we have seen an increase over 2019 levels of traffic volume. At the same time, our urban roads, especially our urban non-interstate roads, have remained below pre-pandemic levels. So what does this mean for traffic safety? Also, just to look at the trend of road departure fatal crashes over the past 5 years, you can see that our road departure crashes in 2020 are about at the same level. It's a pretty level line for the past several years for our road departure crashes. So had rural traffic gone down and stayed down, we would have expected a reduction in road departure crashes, since those are most prevalent on rural roads. But that didn't happen because the traffic in rural areas bounced back pretty quickly, and road departures have been constant. At the same time, if you look at speed-related crashes on rural roads, with the traffic being very similar to pre-pandemic levels, the speed-related crashes on rural roads have been about the same as we were experiencing before the pandemic. However, if you look at urban roads, this is where we see a really huge jump in speed-related fatal crashes. So I believe speed-related fatal crashes are up somewhere around 17% for the year in 2020. But on urban roads, or roads that VDOT classifies as urban roads in the state, speed-related fatal crashes are up 43%. And if you look at the right-hand side of this slide, where I have it circled in red, a big portion of those deaths on urban roads are pedestrians, motorcyclists, and bicyclists. So around 30% of those speed-related deaths were pedestrians, motorcyclists, or bicyclists. So what are a couple of takeaways and observations that I have based on those numbers? First is we need to keep doubling down on addressing road departure crashes on our rural roads. Road departure remains the type of crash that takes about half of our persons who die in traffic crashes in the state. And we need to keep focusing on addressing those in our rural roads, because traffic in our rural areas is very similar to what it has been even before the pandemic. And number two, we need to work to protect our most vulnerable road users in urban areas where speeding deaths are increasing. Very likely speeding is up because congestion is down, and the pandemic has helped us realize the value of some level of congestion on many of these roads. But with less congestion and more continued teleworking in our urban areas, we need to make sure that our roads in our urban areas are as safe as possible for everybody who needs to travel, and especially our pedestrians and bicyclists and other vulnerable road users. Because the reality is the risk is not shared equally among all the travelers in the state. This chart, if you look at the right-hand side, shows that if you're involved in a crash in Virginia as a pedestrian, there's over a 7% chance that you're going to die, and a 34% chance that you'll be seriously injured. If you go down the chart, you can see other crash factors like being unbelted is number 2, being in a crash as a motorcyclist is number 3. But the risk is much greater for these vulnerable road users, and speed and travel speed certainly plays a role. Here is a chart we compiled using data from 2014 to 2018 of our pedestrian crashes in Virginia. And what you can see here is if you're struck as a pedestrian on a road with a 50-mile-per-hour posted speed or greater, you have a 50-50 chance of surviving that crash. And with more less congestion, more opportunity to speed on the urban types of roads where we know we have pedestrians. We need to be really focused on trying to make safe pedestrian crossing opportunities as quickly as we can. Another thing to mention before I wrap up is related to also to equity and health equity. Virginia's Department of Health has developed a health opportunity index score for all census tracts in the state. It's made up of 4 profiles that are shown in the green boxes. And those profiles, the score is made up of a very varied number of indicators that you see in the yellow box below. And basically, this score that every census tract gets predicts the opportunity for a person who is born in that census tract to live a long and healthy life. And the scores are divided into 5 ratings of very low to very high at the top. And each rating represents 20% of the census tracts in the state. And what we see if we look at the health opportunity index scores and compare it to where our pedestrian crashes occur is that almost 60% of our pedestrian deaths and injuries occur next to census tracts that have very low or low health opportunity index scores. So pedestrian safety is an issue that affects different communities more than others, and we need to be aware of that as we plan where to make investments in traffic safety. So finally, I want to leave you with ongoing efforts that VDOT's undertaken as we speak to try to address some of these issues. We are installing 8 proven safety countermeasures on all roads that meet the criteria for these countermeasures that are state maintained over the next several years. We're just wrapping up high visibility back plates and flashing yellow arrows at all the traffic signals. And we'll soon be focused on road departure improvements like curve signs and rumble strips. In addition, we're also installing pedestrian crossings at over 500 traffic signals on roads that we know have a higher presence of pedestrians and risk of pedestrian safety issues. With that, I want to thank you again. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mark. I took lots of notes, and I know I have some questions for you when we get to the question and answer portion. Just a reminder to everybody that if you do have questions for Mark or any of our panelists, please write them up in the chat space, and I will be asking those questions for you. Okay, so now next we're going to move on and discuss law enforcement, and for that we have Chief English, Chief of the Henrico County Police Department. Chief?
Well, good morning, everybody. And I certainly appreciate Mark's presentation as it kind of sets a little bit of stage of just some brief remarks that I'm going to make in terms of enforcement, the enforcement piece of this. As many of you know, Henrico County, we have always been known as a jurisdiction that we believe we need to hold people accountable for their actions when operating a motor vehicle. And I would say that one of the goals is try to keep everyone safe on our roads, which is, as you may know, is a really daunting task for us to do that. But my philosophy for my officers, and since I took the helm, is I just want to make sure that we're enforcing quality infractions within the county. And the reason for that is that, one of the goals is to try to change driver behavior. And a lot of times, we're looking at some serious violations. We want to make sure that we hold folks accountable for those violations. And so there are going to be some times when I also ask my officers to use discretion, because again, we are an agency that believes in community policing. And sometimes, whether it be a warning, that may be a necessary element of enforcement. But I can tell you that 2020 was a year that we have never seen before. In terms of traffic enforcement and traffic safety. It was a year that had many hurdles, as you know. law enforcement across not just the county, but across the state of the nation. We had to deal with civil unrest. The pandemic was in full effect at that particular time. And then there were other movements to look at how policing is done that we had to deal with as well in terms of police reform. And so when the pandemic hit last year, there was an effort on our part to maintain safety for our personnel. And so you didn't see I guess a more robust role on our part as far as traffic enforcement, unless there was something extremely egregious that was going on throughout the county. And so we tried to pull back to minimize contact with individuals in order to maintain safety for our folks as well. And then with the pandemic, also what you saw was you didn't see as many as Mark mentioned, you didn't see as many vehicles on the roadways. And so you would think with those two elements, us pulling back, not many people on the roadways, that you would see traffic crashes diminish. And that's not what we saw in 2020 in terms of the volume. And so we actually saw our traffic crash numbers go up from 2019 to 2020. We went from 26 fatal crashes. I'm talking about fatalities, fatal crashes in 2019. We had 26. And in 2020, we had 30 crashes. And you would think that would have been just the opposite. But what we end up seeing is that because there was not a lot of enforcement going on in 2020 or minimal enforcement going on in 2020, we saw individuals that were taking advantage of the lack of enforcement. And we saw some ungodly speeds that we had never been accustomed to seeing before. And I think that has been kind of was mentioned in Mark's presentation. We saw a lot of speeds over 100 miles an hour. And what you saw was you would see people posting their speeds on social media. And it just goes to show that people felt really, really comfortable during this time frame because they know that we were trying to mitigate our contact with individuals. And so what ends up happening is that we went back, we started looking at the data, where we were starting to see some of the problems, some of our traffic crash intersections that we were seeing. And so we tried to look at all the data to try to mitigate and make sure we put resources in the proper areas. And so although we saw 25% of our fatal crashes, what we saw was that 25% of our fatal crashes were people that were not wearing seatbelts. And that's an element where we felt like if we could just look at that, enforce that more, those could have been 25% of lives that could have been saved if people had just worn a seatbelt. But as you know now, that is a secondary violation. And so those are some hurdles that we're going to have to get around. But what we did was we did go in and look at our problematic intersections where we were having crashes, and we tried to focus on those particular locations and try to mitigate some of those. We continued to look at the data. We looked at some areas where we saw an excessive amount of speeding, and we tried to focus on those particular corridors, not just on the highways and interstates, but in the county environment as well. We were seeing some ungodly speeds, and so we try to focus on those to try to mitigate those. One of the things I will say that we have done a great job of is working with our law enforcement partners, from the DMV Highway Safety Office to MAD to Drive Smart, just to name a few. We've worked extremely well with those particular entities. And what we've seen is with their support, we've been able to focus our enforcement efforts through the highway safety grants that are available. We utilize those on a consistent basis, just looking at particular areas where they be DMV enforcement. As Mark mentioned, we were having a lot of pedestrian fatalities and people get struck by those. And so we try to look at those particular areas to try to focus our efforts on traffic safety. So like I said, we did do an analysis on our crash locations, speeding problems, and even occupant protection studies that we conducted just to focus our efforts on those. And so, like I said, we have seen some highly unusual speeds, and so we've had to ramp up our speed enforcement in those particular areas. And for us, traffic safety and enforcement is twofold for us. So what we found is that if we concentrate and focus on highway safety within the county, it also mitigates our violent crime within the county, because many of our problem locations are even really on the outskirts of where we're seeing violent crime spikes. And so our focus has to continue to be on traffic safety, mitigating speeds that are going on in our county, and also making sure we're concentrating in the right areas. We have always, like I said, we have always been a focal point for traffic safety throughout our county. And so officers are really focusing on that particular issue. And like I said, for us, twofold, because we are getting a lot of bang for our buck based on our analysis and where we're focusing our officers. Speed enforcement is going to continue to be a focus for us, because like I said, we've seen not only traffic crashes between vehicles go up, but we're seeing a lot of pedestrian fatalities as well. And again, a lot of that has to do with not only enforcement, but also information that's being shared on our website, being passed out to our community members as well. And so we're going to continue to make sure that enforcement in Henrico is critical, because it also provides not only safety for drivers, but also safety in our residential areas that are experiencing violent crime spikes as well. So that's how we're going to continue to tackle those. The grants, like I said, DMV grants are working extremely well. We continuously utilize those for DUI enforcement as well, as we've seen a lot of that in our county. But that's going to always continue to be a focal point for our Henrico County officers to maintain safety for our residents.
Thank
And
you,
with
Chief.
that said, any other questions, I'm looking forward, like I said, I'm looking forward as well to the conversation and any other questions that the members may have.
Well, thank you. I know that you have prompted me for several questions that I know will lead us to a lively discussion coming up in a few minutes. And again, hopefully we will receive some more questions from the audience in our chat room. Next, in order to discuss EMS, emergency medical services, I'm going to turn it over to Dia Gainor. Dia, who is coming to us, by the way, from lovely Boise, Idaho, which, just for those of you who may be as geographically challenged as I tend to be, is 2 hours behind us. So when we started at 9:30 this morning, it was 7:30 her time. I thank her even more for her being bright and chipper this morning, and we understand that it is now 8 a.m. there in Boise, and hopefully it's cooled down somewhat.
Well, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And no, it has not cooled down, and the wildland fires have spiked, so we're banked down in smoke. I'll apologize in advance if I have to clear my throat or wipe my eyes. And thank you for the kind introduction earlier, and I hope to round out this presentation. Mr. Cole and Chief English's points are very well taken, and want to talk specifically about emergency medical services, or EMS. If my introduction didn't reveal it, I'm simply the biggest transportation junkie in the EMS industry. But I'd be remiss if I did not start with a big shout out to the Office of EMS in the Department of Health in the Commonwealth. They are one of the most seasoned, robust, and sophisticated state EMS offices in the nation. You're very fortunate to have the kind of resources that are available to you, some of which I'll give you a bit of a taste of during this presentation. And I'd encourage you to reach out to them. They're an amazing crew. And it's as simple as Googling VA space OEMS to find them. You have new friends in places you've yet to meet. I'm just trying to get my screen to cooperate. Having spent 41 years in the EMS and transportation industry, I spent 12 years in the field as a volunteer firefighter and paramedic. I really never thought I'd see a picture like this. The intersection of our two fields in a pretty graphic way, as masking up vehicles might be the best metaphor for 2020, besides the pandemic itself and the effect it had on human life in residences and hospital rooms. We certainly witnessed the kinds of challenges and dichotomies, really, that have already been alluded to. But my objective, today is really to provoke or enhance your relationship with EMS, whether you work at the state, a regional, county, or a local level. There are many opportunities to improve care for patients in motor vehicle crashes and motor vehicle related incidents, as well as non-motor vehicle, bicyclist and non-motorist involved pedestrian incidents as well. I know thinking about the D drivers is a familiar term to all of you, but our D drivers are different. And that's because until prevention is 100% successful, EMS and post-crash trauma care is really the only hope the seriously injured victim has. Not all fatalities are dead at the scene. And simply put, the clock is the biggest enemy of the seriously injured victim, and their opportunity to survive is directly related to the clock, to how quickly the incident is detected with less vehicle on the roads, especially in rural areas, how long it might be until the next car comes by. And we probably could do, a whole session on detection related issues as it relates to connected vehicles and to, frankly, smartphones. As some of you probably have seen the television commercial about, I didn't wake up thinking that my smartphone would save my life today after being in a crash, and a phone alerting a driver whether they should call 911 or not. Distance is a major factor, again, especially in rural areas, not only distance to the scene, but tying into our next D, the destination. What hospital does this victim need to go to? And finally, data. So those are our D drivers, if you will, motivators to how to improve and change the outcomes for individuals who are involved in serious roadway related incidents. So, here we have the crew early on in the pandemic, appropriately masked with N95s. That's a great start. But once additional guidance came out from CDC about the utilization of full face masks, like the clear shields that you've seen on television, or unfortunately might have seen in person if you were in a hospital or other care environment, as well as gowns, we had a lot of dilemmas to address. Does the gown go, over the reflective clothing that the firefighter in turnout gear on the left has on? And what about the individual on the right? Does he put his gown on as he approaches the vehicle and then the reflective vest because he's operating on a roadway, or the other way around? And which one is contaminated and can't be used on the next call as a result? So these are really major challenges that the EMS system faced, unique to the pandemic and specific to roadway and other transportation related incidents. And frankly, not all of which has been completely solved yet. We have yet to see a product emerge in the field that is both a biodefense wardrobe piece that is also reflective. And that's something that I think is worth working on with the private sector and the manufacturing sector for protection of emergency response personnel in general, all emergency response personnel in the future. We too are very, data driven, and the data I'm showing you now is by calendar year, with dating back to the blue line in 2018, and the green is 2019, the red line 2020, and the purple line is 2021 through week 26 of the year. And you say week 26, well, that's through 2 weeks ago. That's correct. Ambulance crews in the Commonwealth, as well as throughout the United States, about almost 15,000 local EMS agencies fill out a patient care report, their version of the law enforcement crash report, about the scene, about the patient care they rendered, about the signs and symptoms and injuries the individual had, and what kinds of treatments and interventions that they provided. And predictably, yes, we saw a big dip in the 911 activations of EMS agencies to motor vehicle crash incidents. But notice, most importantly, because I know you would predict that big dip, our friends in law enforcement found the same thing, of course. But note the purple line. The rate is in 2021 not only creeping back up, but exceeding the rate of motor vehicle related crash activations that occurred in 2018 and 2019. And again, I would encourage you to reach out to the Office of EMS in the Virginia Department of Health, because these data are available on a state-specific and even regional and county-specific basis as well. Yeah, when we think about that distance and destination determination, focus on the triangles. This is from the Virginia Office of Emergency Medical Services website. The triangles are the only designated trauma centers in Virginia. The triangles are the only designated trauma centers in Virginia, where trauma triage protocols suggest, if not dictate, seriously injured patients and those suspected of serious injury, which often aren't immediately visible on the outside. They may be inside the brain, they may be inside the chest or inside the belly, not immediately obvious. There are some long distances to traverse to get patients to those facilities. Research indicates that patients who are cared for at the higher level trauma centers have a 25% lower death rate. Again, not all fatalities are dead at the scene. So what's available to patients as they endure the sheer violence that a motor vehicle crash or other motor vehicle related incident type incurs, the necessity to transport those patients in some parts of your state or in your region alone may be pretty significant. Again, the clock is the patient's biggest enemy, and hence the need and use of things like helicopters, as painful as it might be for those of you engineers with responsibility for roadway closure. In order to land a helicopter, that's what's driving that necessity. But we've had other experiences as well, very peculiar ones. Again, the red line is 2020. The blue shading is when the national emergency was declared. What was experienced by EMS, and remember, EMS is a transportation issue, right? The care of a patient after a crash is a transportation issue, and the hospitals being overwhelmed, the hospital emergency departments, including emergency departments associated with trauma centers, could not accept the patients out of the back of the ambulance that were at their back door. And the offload times averages at one point exceeded 31 minutes. That's just the average. So in places that were not overwhelmed with low offload times, really drew that down. There was widespread media coverage of states that had offload times where the ambulances sat in the parking lots with their crash victims in the back of an ambulance for upwards of 8 hours and longer in the state of California specifically, to the point where, you know, fuel vehicles had to be brought in to refuel the ambulances so that they could continue to care for the patient until the emergency department had the capacity to bring the patient indoors. And this continues while the purple line, 2021, is still higher than the prior 2 years of 2018 and 2019. This is a transportation issue and of significant concern. Again, the clock is the seriously injured patient's biggest enemy. So, you know, we've really turned our attention and got, you know, FHWA most certainly and NHTSA have gotten our attention about safe systems and the safe system approach, the element of post-crash care, just as the fourth E was the safety net for the first 3 E's. Post-crash care remains an integral and necessary capability and responsibility of systems to assure optimal patient outcome after a severe incident. We're intensely interested in opportunities to partner with those of you who work in the other elements, in the safe road users, in the safe vehicles, safe speeds, and safe roads domains. We're all part of the same team, and ultimately, until prevention is 100% successful, EMS is the last hope that victim has. So our objectives are really pretty straightforward. Again, this could be its own session about instant detection and transmission of information from connected vehicles, specifically about incidents and incident severity. what mechanisms can be used to offset the effects of distance, specifically response time, getting to the scene safely, and once the patient is extricated, packaged, treated, and transport time, and how long that's going to take to get that patient, especially if they have unique needs like burns or they're pediatric patients, to the right facility. The dynamic selection of routes for transport is an unsolved issue for EMS agencies. If they have 2 trauma centers and they're equidistant roughly from that scene, how does that EMS crew know which route is congested or which route, especially if it's outside of their county or even outside of their region, has a detour involved? And then finally, to encourage you to use the Virginia Office of EMS's National EMS Information System data to uncover solutions for your county, for your region, for your town, your city, to reduce morbidity and mortality from motor vehicle related incidents. Reach out to them, you'll be amazed. So with that, I'll close. Look forward to the question and answer opportunity. And again, thank you all.
Dia, thank you. Thank you so much. It's fascinating. You know, I'll speak personally. I don't often get to be a part of discussions about the EMS. As you say, we so often focus our attention on the prevention, and there, at least my opinion is, I believe that personally I fall short in focusing my attention as much on the post-crash care. And it is, as you say, not everybody arrives dead on arrival. That, as my good friend John Saunders talks about, the golden hour between the crash and then that hour time. It's so important, and trying to utilize the best we can that golden hour to save that life. Thank you, and everything that you and your EMS community does for highway safety. And we look forward to some questions for you in the next section. Next, we're going to hear from Carson Goodrich about educating the masses, education and outreach, advertising, all of these things. It's a fascinating topic, and one that Carson is very very well suited to discuss with us. Carson, you have the floor.
All right, well, thank you. I am going to discuss how the 2020 impact of media outreach and also messaging will impact what we are planning for in the future. So the major time spent in 2019, this is among US adults aged 18 plus. The average time spent with media in all channels was actually 12 hours and 23 minutes in 2019, and then that increased to 2020 and just about a full hour of an increase of media usage. Most of those increases are expected to remain throughout the rest of this year. So we're going to explore today some of the biggest gainers as a result of the pandemic and whether media formats and devices are going to hold on to their 2020 gains or lose them. For 2021, the US adult is...
Carson, I hate to interrupt you. I'm really sorry.
Oh, no, you're okay.
We're seeing, we're not seeing the slide view portion. Could you, and I think your mouse is highlighting it. Maybe if you could click and that portion will come up, and then your advanced slides might actually be presenting, because right now we're just...
You just weren't in presentation mode.
That's it. There we go. That's it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. No. Thank you for stopping me. I want to make sure everybody can see my presentation clearly. So US adults are going to spend an average of 13 hours and 12 minutes with media in 2021. So that's a 9-minute drop from last year during the height of the pandemic. So I also wanted to touch briefly on While media habits have evolved throughout the pandemic, so has the messaging. So this is an example of a video that we were planning to use for last year's Checkpoint Strike Force campaign around the Cinco de Mayo and the July 4th flights. The video is what we were planning to use throughout the state, and what was once a very standard setting, as you'll see, was no longer going to resonate with the current times.
Another round. What a night. I'm gonna head home now.
Make sure you call for a ride. That's what we're doing.
I'm fine. I can drive. I'm fine.
Just calm down. Come on, man. None of us are fit to drive. How about we get you a safe ride home, all right?
So while this video had a strong message, as I mentioned, it would no longer resonate. There were images of a crowded bar, lack of social distancing, and lack of mask wearing meant it was time for some quick creative development on our end to come up with some fresh messaging that would resonate with drivers throughout the state, encouraging them to drive, to not drink and drive while celebrating Cinco de Mayo and the 4th of July. So here is the video that we developed. We used animation for this because, as you all know, production did halt during the pandemic. So this was something that we developed quickly to encourage people to stay home and celebrate safely.
This Cinco de Mayo, if you've been drinking, don't drive. Keep it at your casa and celebrate with whomever or whatever you're cooped up with.
And then for the last flight of the year during 4th of July, this is a video that we use for that holiday.
If the Founding Fathers could tell you one thing this 4th of July, it would be to celebrate safely and don't drink and drive. Okay, 2 things. They tell you 2 things.
So as you'll see here with this new creative, we used animation and wanted to encourage people to remain in their homes. And we knew that video was still being heavily consumed, so it was important for us to develop fresh creative in the video space for these campaigns. We chose to do a 15-second rather than 30 because, as you'll see, there was a lot of social media consumption that increased throughout the pandemic. So we wanted to make sure that our video message would resonate and viewers would watch the video in its entirety. So now I'm going to go into how the pandemic shifted media consumption by channel, starting off with video. So in addition to being disruptive to daily life, the pandemic prevented content production. It also sidelined sports of all types. So the combination of more repeats, delayed premieres, and lack of sporting events heightened the challenges for the TV industry last year. The challenges inspired some audiences to seek out new content. So with less traditional television programming available, the shift to video on demand content wasn't surprising. There were big stars, massive production value, and pop culture awareness. Video on demand options continue to increase the viewing share. So between December of 2019 and December of 2020, the total minutes streamed directly to the TV increased from 117 billion to 132 billion. The video on demand space is expanding as well, with Netflix adding a record 37 million subscribers last year during the pandemic, and Disney Plus reached more than 86 million subscribers in just the first 13 months of its launch. So in 2020, Netflix and YouTube users increased their time spent the most compared with other users of other video services. Last year, Netflix users increased time spent on the platform by 11%, while YouTube engagement grew 9%. A majority of YouTube time still comes from free ad-supported viewing, but growth is also attributable to YouTube TV, which is its subscription-based service. However, engagement with subscription OTT services among users has mostly peaked, as you'll see here in this graph, at least through the remainder of our forecast, which takes us to 2023. So for each service here that's broken out, the time spent increases among users will be insubstantial through 2023. In the US, Pluto TV and Tubi are two other subscription services that are on the rise, but not yet seen here, but something else we're continuing to monitor. So with the audio space, consumers' audio listening habits were disrupted by the loss of commuting early on in the pandemic. So the average amount of time that US adults spent with radio decreased last year, and growth will stall going forward. Instead, people are spending more time listening to digital audio alternatives. So for traditional audio, that includes terrestrial AM and FM radio. And digital radio includes consumption like music, podcasts, or other audio content via internet-based streaming services. So due to the reduction in car commuting last year, terrestrial radio consumption decreased. Digital audio listeners adjusted their behaviors to the lingering circumstances of the pandemic. People developed new listening habits. Both Spotify and Pandora reported increased usage at unusual times of the day, noting weekday usage resembled weekend usage. Podcasts also took a big growth last year throughout the pandemic. Podcasts have seen an unexpected spike in popularity as long-form audio engagements become easier to undertake at any given time of day during the pandemic. So podcasting will make up 20% of average time spent with digital audio this year in 2021. By 2023, that share will rise to 25%. Among podcast listeners, podcast share of digital audio usage is even more impressive at 36% this year, rising to 40% by 2023. And while digital audio consumption continues to increase, I did just want to show these graphs to demonstrate that AM and FM audio is still the main source of audio usage here. And this is again with all adults 18 plus throughout the United States. So traditional radio does trend though to an older audience. So 50% of AM, FM listening hours are by people of age 48 plus. The median age is 48 for AM, FM. The median age for streaming audio is 33, while the median age for podcast listeners is 34. So ultimately, music is still on top as the type of audio categories continue to vary and grow in that space. As you'll see here, 74% of audio consumed is still in the music space. So then we'll move on to social media. Social media, as everyone I'm sure is aware, did take a huge growth last year in 2020. Social networking surged in 2020, but we do anticipate that engagement in that space will normalize. Every social platform that we've measured received an engagement boost, primarily as people relied on those platforms to replace in-person socializing during the pandemic. However, the emergence of TikTok and a spike in conversations about social injustice and politics also contributed to a record time spent in this space in 2020. We estimate the social network users spent 1 hour and 37 minutes per day on social platforms in 2020. And then also we cannot talk about media in 2020 without covering the popularity of TikTok and that emergence in 2020. So last year's increase in the time spent with social networks was driven most strongly by TikTok, which was up 40% from the previous year. Twitter was up 25%, and then Instagram was up 11% among each platform's users. By far, the biggest gainer was TikTok. And That added about 12 minutes to reach 39 minutes per day among users of the app. As a result, last year, adult TikTok users spent more time on TikTok than Facebook users used on Facebook. By 2023, adult TikTok users will spend 35 minutes on the social network versus Facebook at 32 minutes among adult users. It's also worth noting that many of TikTok's users are ages 17 and younger, and here this just shows ages 18 plus. So really, it shows how much higher really usage is when you're looking at it in its entirety. Oh, my light just turned off in my office. There we go. So what does this all mean? It's critical to stay on top of the ever-changing media landscape to connect with prospects on their terms. Consumers have multiple ways to connect with content, so understanding where will help create thoughtful conversations with brands. Digital media consumptions continue to increase, but don't rule out traditional. That space still remains a bedrock for many consumers. And we also don't expect time spent to snap back to where it was in 2019. Patterns of usage were evolving in any case, and economic fallout from the pandemic will continue to influence time spent beyond 2020, as will lingering wariness about safety in the outside world. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson. Your presentation has generated well, questions from me, but also from others. I do want to get one sort of definition that I almost jumped in, but I said, no, I'll just wait till the end. You used an acronym that I'm not sure our entire community is aware of, and that is OTT. Can you explain what that is when you were talking about streaming services?
Absolutely. So OTT stands for over the top, and that is any streaming service or a streaming service that is through the internet. So rather than video on demand, if you that's something that is purchased through say Comcast or your cable provider, OTT is a service that is through the internet.
Great. And I'm going to stick with you right here for just a second, because there was a question that was generated in the chat room that was for you. This is from Melanie Stokes, whom you know well.
Yes, hi, Melanie.
And she says that the explanation about researching and pinpointing the main audience for safety messaging and where and how these users consume media is excellent. However, is effective messaging developed that will change behavior? Or I'm sorry, how is effective messaging developed that will change behavior? Do we use focus groups? Do we use other methods? What is our methodology for developing persuasive messaging?
That's a great question, Melanie. So it's a little bit of art and a little bit of science when we're looking at the messaging portion. So when we are putting together what our media plan is based off of a focus audience, we are able to pull not only their media habits, but their lifestyle and information as well. So all of that information is what we use to kind of kick off creative development with our team. So it's a mix of what we know and what we're able to pull about our focus audience, as well as our creative team and what they can come up with. So as we love when DMV shares with us crash data, we are able to pinpoint pretty specifically where we're trying to change that behavior, all to inform our messaging development and what will ultimately change behavior.
Great, thanks, Melanie. I hope that answers your question. Dia, I have one for you as well in the chat room. And this is from Bethany McCune, who asks you, how much is distance evaluated for rallying the responders? This is a question thinking about rural areas, and particularly rural areas that mostly have volunteer rescue squads. How much is distance evaluated when calling those responders?
Great question. So those individual rural squads can tell you in one state, for example, when they relicense the EMS agencies, as must be done annually or every other year, the state can ask, where on any interstate, US roadway, or state highway is your longest response time? Assuming daylight conditions, ideal weather, and crew and vehicle immediate, availability. So every one of the rescue squads and other EMS agencies in the Commonwealth can answer that question. I don't know that they've been asked in your state. And then more importantly, you could take any segment of roadway in a rescue squad's coverage area. And let's say we imagine the motor coach crash occurs there. You could put a pin in that map, and through that local rescue squad, other neighboring EMS agencies, and the state EMS office, you could assemble a quantification, how many ambulances could be at this scene in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, how many helicopters could be here in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, how many trauma center beds are within 30 minutes, 60 minutes. So you can actually do a very detailed assessment of rural roads to determine post-crash risk. Hopefully that gets to your question.
Yeah, well, I find that fascinating, and I wonder, is that and I'd like to ask Chief English about that. Is that something, Chief, that, well, now you're not in a rural area, but you were in Harrisonburg, and I know Harrisonburg isn't rural itself, but it's near rural areas. Is this something, and Dia, you can touch on this too, that this type of mapping, this data, is this something that is used also by law enforcement when, in their role in post-crash and that type of thing? Is this information that is widely disseminated amongst the highway safety community? Dia, I guess we'll start with you on that.
Chief, go ahead if you're ready.
Now, it's very similar in nature and how we look at things post crash. I think the major thing we're trying to look at is collecting that data to ensure that we're able to provide the proper resources to the proper areas in order to mitigate that. So it's very similar, and we do try to share that data. I wouldn't necessarily say from agency to agency, but throughout our division. And even in Harrisonburg, we try to make sure we share that with our members, just so they'll know whether we need to focus those resources.
And I'll just add to that, we built the proof of concept on Meyer, on the model inventory of roadway elements, and used a similar approach to say, right here in this stretch, what's available, and called it the model inventory of emergency care elements. Haven't seen implementation on a widespread basis, but it is completely doable, and color code your roadway map accordingly, red, yellow, green, if the big one happens here.
Right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for that, and thank you for your question, Bethany. I did have another question for Chief English, but I'm gonna put that one aside for just a second, because I want to get into there and a news article that came out that was written over the past 3 or 4 weeks that really responded to some NHTSA data, and I just want us to discuss this a little bit because it does bring into the conversation the fifth E that I've been talking about, and that I wanted to make sure that we touched on today, that being equity, and how equity ties into the other 4 E's. So let me just give you the headline, and then I want to get everybody to respond a little bit about how you believe your particular aspect of the 4 E's really ties into this issue. So the headline was this, and perhaps you heard the story. Traffic deaths jump for Black Americans who couldn't afford to stay home during COVID. And the article goes on to suggest, I won't read the entire thing, obviously, but that traffic deaths in 2020 soared for not only for all Americans, but particularly Black Americans who bore the disproportionate share of increase in fatalities. It goes on to say that there was an increase in deaths 23% amongst Black Americans in what appeared to be a stark illustration of which populations could and could not afford to stay home throughout the pandemic. And this was just during the pandemic. There's also articles that have come out much more recently about how the Black and brown community bear the brunt of a larger disproportionate brunt of pedestrian fatalities, unbelted fatalities, these types of things. When we're talking about equity in highway safety, I believe that reports such as this and statistics such as this really puts the onus on us to begin to look at what we do through that lens. And so I'd like to if I can, get everybody to respond to that issue. And I'm going to start with Mark Cole, because Mark Cole stuck a pin in this a little bit earlier when he began to talk about the use of the Health Opportunity Index in terms of pedestrian safety and traffic engineering. Mark, so much of what we've learned is not only who you are, but where you live might actually determine your probability of not only being in a crash, but surviving a crash. Dia talked about that. You've talked about that. How can we as highway safety professionals utilize this information that we have and begin to make a difference by establishing equity as a fifth E and then making decisions based upon equity? How do we do that from an engineering perspective?
Yeah, thank you, George. That's a great question, and I think it's a very important question because this is not something that historically we've really probably paid a ton of attention and resources to. But in recent years, with the development of things like the Health Opportunity Index from Department of Health, it's really opened the door and kind of opened our eyes to all kinds of new opportunities to make a difference with traffic safety. And with the Health Opportunity Index example here in Virginia, at VDOT, we've been able to use that information. Like with any data source, we wanted to check to see if there was some correlation between traffic safety outcomes and the Health Opportunity Index. And when we ran the numbers, we were amazed at how strong the connection was between that Health Opportunity Index score and where our pedestrian crashes were occurring. So we have a Virginia Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, and in that plan, we evaluated all the public road segments in the state and ranked them by risk for pedestrian safety, using various data sets that are factors involved in pedestrian crashes. But when we added Health Opportunity Index to that mix of data and factors, by far it was the strongest connection. So, you know, it's become a really strong tool for us to pinpoint which communities, which areas have greater pedestrian safety needs, and then those areas are where we're investing directly in infrastructure. So that 500 plus traffic signals I talked about earlier, where we're installing crosswalks, many of those are in these very low and low Health Opportunity Index areas because that's where we're seeing that connection between pedestrian safety and health opportunities. So I think there's a ton of promise here. The sky's really the limit as far as how we can use this information to help inform, you know, where we spend our resources. But I'm excited to see what the future holds. One thing that I know that may help us a little bit is, you know, we don't currently receive race information with the crash data itself. So what we do is we use other supporting information, either through the census data or things like the HOI, to help us know about the community. But any additional information about socioeconomic issues would be most helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Chief English.
Yeah, that's Mark. That's some great information in terms of that study. But I will say that for us, as I mentioned before, 25% of our fatal crashes were the result of people not wearing a seatbelt. Or we felt like people would have survived if they had not, if they had just take that extra step and just taken the time to put a seatbelt on. And so when we're looking at our focus on equity, our focus is pretty much on areas of concern. Now, I will say I'm kind of like Mark in terms of data collection on actually fatalities. It's not something really on demographic data that we've really kept a track on. But what we have kept on is our enforcement data in terms of demographics. We've actually looked at that, and we have that posted on our website in terms of what we're doing. So it gives us an opportunity to kind of evaluate ourselves, looking at particular areas of focus for us. And it gives us that opportunity that if we are having fatalities in those areas of focus, we can provide information to those residents, such as things as not wearing your seatbelts, doing more PSAs and things of that nature for those particular locations. But we have not seen, and I will say, just in our fatalities, we have not seen that particular uptick in terms of demographics for crashes, because ours are happening pretty much across the county in some of our most high volume traffic areas within the county. So again, our focus is always going to continue to be on areas of concern where we're seeing more crashes and doing more speed enforcement, red light enforcement, those type of things, because those are the issues that are creating problems for us when it comes to fatalities in the county.
Well, I want to follow, and thank you for that. I'd like to follow up because one of the questions in the chat room, I think, sort of naturally flows into this, and this is from Kimberly Bird in my office. One of the areas of focus is to ensure that our underserved communities and diverse communities are being educated on highway safety. We know that enforcement is key. However, education is key as well. Would you have any best practices from the Henrico County Police Department that you use to educate the underserved and diverse communities on buckling up, slowing down, not driving impaired, and not driving distracted, as well as looking out for all road users? Do you have any best practices that you can share with us?
Well, one of the things that we do in some of our underserved communities is there's a couple of areas that we look at. So each month we do a community walk in a neighborhood, and many of those neighborhoods are in areas of our underserved. And so we try to provide information regarding some of the issues that we're seeing across the county. And so sometimes it's crime information, sometimes it's related to traffic information as well. And so being able to let those community members know what's going on in terms of traffic and fatalities and being safe are all elements that we pass out pamphlets and things of that nature to our underserved community. And so that's one of the ways that we try to reach out. The other areas in terms of just putting stuff on our website and our Facebook page in terms of traffic safety. And so we look at those elements and try to create PSAs for we had a lot going on with pedestrian fatalities and pedestrians getting hit. And so we try to do PSAs in those underserved communities and making sure that folks are looking at that in terms of getting that information out as well. And so that's where we try to reach out. That's our outlet. As we know, a lot of people are getting on social media in terms of that. And so we try to do as much as we can in order to put out information related to traffic.
Great, thank you. Dia?
Well, if I can be selective about which question to answer and to the equity
Absolutely.
points. Oh,
Yeah.
good. I would say that, EMS is more sort of universal and not selective in, well, we're going to focus on this area or this area and simply responding to the 911 call. We're very fortunate in that the actions of EMTs and paramedics are highly protocolized, if you will, with clinical treatment guidelines that are step by step by step, that with the exception of scenarios involving agitated or violent patients or bystanders, generally speaking, it's a straightforward series of steps, and there are no deviations because of somebody's race or ethnicity. And there's also never a consideration about an individual's ability to pay. So we look at it through a little different kinds of lens because of how procedural medical, the medical aspects are of EMS care.
Yeah, I guess I mean the equity issues involving EMS, it would seem to me, would all be about would be location driven, as we were talking about, distance, destinations, and that type of thing. Did the fact that we had such a tremendous change in what you called, what was it, the out? I'm not going to use the proper term, but it was offboarding. In other words, when how long it took to take the passenger from the hospital, delivery time, I guess is what it is, or did the pandemic and those challenges change the way that that EMS began to look at destination determination? Is there any sort of thing that has been modified in 2021 that is a direct result of 2020 as it relates to destination determination and that type of thing?
There have been systems in place for a long time for major multi-casualty incidents, again, like the motor coach crash, right? 47 patients, where are you going to send them? And public safety answering points or other systems monitoring bed status, where the hospitals could say, we can take 4, we can take 3, we can take 1. But the protracted duration of the pandemic made it sort of impossible on a long-term ongoing basis to tolerate hospitals saying, nope, nope, you can't bring one here, because if the next hospital and the next hospital and the next hospital all say, no, 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 we can't take care of them. And so some of those systems, we found flaws in some of those systems because they were intended for short duration incidents, not 15 months worth of incidents. We've got to focus on that moving forward. Great.
And Carson, I want to make sure that we get you in this conversation about equity, because it is you have a very important role, and that is because we need to persuasively reach and address highway safety issues in a diverse community, and if we are finding that certain communities are disproportionately impacted, how do we utilize the E of education and outreach as in terms of trying to equitably communicate this message?
Yeah, it's a great question, and if there are certain areas that are being disproportionately affected, then we can also disproportionately craft a media plan and messaging to overcompensate for that, hopefully. So that's when we're looking at certain radio or television placements, we want to make sure that we're covering a diverse group of areas when we're buying our media. Also in out-of-home placements, we want to make sure that we're in those communities, and whether that's on bus systems that are driving up and down different roadways throughout the state with that. In fact, we are doing that right now with our pedestrian safety campaign that's up. So we want to look at it that way in terms of where we're buying the media, but then also the messaging itself. And we want to make sure that we have an equal representation in the creative that we're developing. It's really important to us to make sure that that's a part of what we put together when we're focusing on any type of safety campaign.
Yeah, and there's it seems like so much of your presentation was fascinating to me about how much time we spend consuming media. I'm always blown away with that number. I mean 2019 seemed like a lot, and then boom, 2020. So that was crazy. And also the different platforms. So TikTok, like question mark. We're not there. We're not utilizing TikTok. Do we need to be there? 17-year-olds are driving. They're going to be 21-year-olds. They're probably still going to be using TikTok, and it doesn't seem like they're using other forms of social media that we tend to focus more of our resources on. As these new social media platforms begin to develop, you know, what's the tipping point where we say, okay, this is kind of fun to see the kids do this. Now we really need to be in this space for persuasive messaging. When do you know when that tipping point is?
Yeah, it's another great question. So when TikTok came on the scene, it is something that we monitored right away. What's really important to us, though, is brand safety. We want to ensure that any highway safety messaging is correlated with what we would call brand safe content, and not aligned with anything that would be inappropriate. So when it comes to TikTok, that's something that we are not yet at a place where we feel 100% confident that that is a brand safe platform for us. That said, we can still reach that audience because people are always multitasking. They might be on TikTok, but they're also watching TV, or they're on their computer scrolling on different websites. So it's not that that's the only platform we can reach those people. So it certainly was all the rage in 2020 and continues to be this year. So we definitely will continue to monitor it.
Yeah, I have a 17-year-old, so I can vouch for that. Yeah. All right, I want to change gears a little bit because we've had a really great question, one that's broad enough that I think I want to have a short conversation about before we get into our final elements, and that is this. It's from John Saunders, who says, creating a safety culture and advancing a safe system approach is thought by many to be the most effective route to achieve the goals of reaching 0 deaths on our roadways. And if you were part of our opening session, you heard about the safe system approach from Jane Terry with the National Safety Council. Do you believe that we can best implement this collaborative philosophy in the Commonwealth? Mark, I'm going to start with you, because you and VDOT, you guys manage the process for the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about safe system and Strategic Highway Safety Plan.
Yeah, thank you, George. I lost some of your audio on the question, but I see it in the chat. So if I miss anything, let me know. But I certainly think a safe system approach gives us a great opportunity to further the work of reducing crashes in the Commonwealth. And a safe system approach is really about continuing to work together with the 4 E's, maybe now the 5 E's, as George mentioned, you know, equity as an E, just to make sure that we all collaborate and try to do things that make a difference. I think a key to the safe system approach is to follow the data and to do things, strategies and actions as informed by the data that will give you the greatest return on our investment of resources, which of course is reduction of our serious crashes and injuries. In the safe system approach, it kind of changes the mindset too, you know, from expecting people to change behavior to fit the transportation system and transportation safety, to making a transportation system that fits people's behavior. You know, people are going to make mistakes. People aren't going to be perfect. And we need to have a transportation system that is forgiving and that has safety built in, kind of underpinning everything that we do. You know, like controlling our travel speeds, because we know if there's a high speed crash and a vulnerable road user, it's going to be a serious outcome. Or some of the things that Dia and Chief English were talking about today, about how we can collaborate and kind of follow the information to work together. You know, some of this is things we've been doing for a long time. But some of it is new. And I think that mindset of meeting people where they are, instead of expecting people to change their behavior to meet us where we would like them to be, I think that's going to be a big step in creating a system that works for everybody, that's safe for everybody.
Thanks, Mark. Dia, Chief, Carson, anybody have any comments on this question before I move on? Dia, go ahead.
I would say yes and yes, twofold answer. Number one, because the safe systems approach continues the recognition that post-crash care is an element, and assuming that equitable consideration of the issues involved with post-crash care and the resource needs in post-crash care are addressed, we can all be very hopeful. Secondly, because you enjoy such a wonderful cadre of knowledgeable EMS individuals at the state, regional, and local level in Virginia, coupled with the amazing trauma care system in Virginia, you have a better leg up than many, many other states.
Great, thanks. Chief Carson, any comments?
I would just say that we can certainly use that approach in our messaging. It's continued education and being proactive in our safety reminders, and really trying to consume and surround motorists with that safety messaging, no matter where they are throughout that day. Continuing to reiterate the message and having it appear in more than one place is what will really result in changed behavior.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay. Well, we are 3 minutes shy of our 2 minutes now, shy of our closing time, and I asked you all to come to the meeting today with one recommendation, and that's this: we all spent 2020 doing things so completely differently. Most of the time cooped up at home. You know, I'm obviously not in my office now, a direct result of 2020, and as a result, we did a lot of things that we didn't do, and part of which was we had some time, as Carson has indicated, to spend some more time consuming media. And whether that media was a book or a Twitter feed or a podcast. And so I wanted to ask you to come prepared with one recommendation of something that you have been consuming, Carson, in the past few months, as a recommendation for those of us who are listening that might expand our horizons and teach us something. I will start by saying that I have discovered the podcast, the Ezra Klein Show. If anybody is a podcast devotee, find the Ezra Klein Show. He's an amazing interviewer who gets fascinating guests. Each show is one person, conversations that you just don't find anywhere else. And I highly recommend the Ezra Klein Show as my recommendation. We'll start with Mark.
Yeah, thank you, George. You know, over the past year plus with teleworking as much as we have, and with all the screen time and everything, and just the seriousness of the work that we do, it's so important, but it's also very serious and engaging. So I kind of needed something different. So I learned a new instrument during the pandemic and learned to play the ukulele. It's such a happy sound, you know, and it just brings me joy and lowers the stress level. So learn a new instrument. That's my advice.
I love it, and I wish you'd brought it. It would have been a great way to close out the session. Chief.
This is an interesting closing here. I have never, you know, for me, the pandemic brought about definitely a different change in terms of how we operate, and this virtual platform for me is something I have never ever really been a fan of, and so we had to learn to really adapt utilizing this. And what we found, and what I found over the period of time, is that this has been an exceptional way to reach more folks, because I have a lot of my community members that, you know, can't get out in person anyway. And so the virtual platform has helped me realize that this is an excellent way to disseminate information, be able to connect with individuals in our community. And so I would just I would just say for folks, learn to embrace embrace this platform because it is very helpful.
I'd love to hear that. You know, the other day, and I'm gonna tell on Kimberly. Kimberly and I were having a meeting with two other people in the office. We realized we were all four in the building, but where were we meeting? We were meeting online. We very easily could have just gone to an office and met, but we met online. So I think that's a good point, and we are embracing it, I think, slowly. But thank you, Chief. Dia.
I've got to go to something on the audience's behalf, a secret treasure that they may not realize exists under NHTSA's leadership. It's ems.gov. Believe it or not, there's an amazing compilation if you want to learn more about trauma care or EMS in general, and our friends at NHTSA are kind enough to house that repository for us. So please go check it out.
I'm definitely going to do that. As I've told you, I need to educate myself more on EMS. So thank you for that. Carson, you get to close us out.
So George, I think you and I both were big contributors to the rise in podcast usage that I had spoke to earlier, because I have a podcast recommendation as well. It's
Good.
How I Built This, produced by NPR. So it features some of the best companies and innovators and explains how they got to where they are today. So it's pretty inspiring.
That's great to hear, because I've heard of that, and I was interested in trying it out. So look, we're a little bit beyond time. First of all, I just want to thank our panelists today. I truly enjoyed having a conversation with you guys. I could have gone for another 30, 45 minutes very easily. There were a couple of questions we didn't get to. Again, I apologize to everybody, but we had a really great conversation. I do want to point out that all of the presentations from these various sessions of the summit are going to be made available at the end of the summit. Again, to today's participants, thank you so much for your willingness to be a part of our summit and to participate the way that you did. It really has been quite meaningful, and we appreciate it. So I'm going to close out not only the session, but also the summit. And this does bring to a close our 2021 Virtual Highway Safety Summit. And I hope the discussions that we've had throughout the summit have inspired you, and that you're going to come away with some new information and ideas or strategies that's going to help you in your daily quest to drive the traffic fatalities in Virginia towards zero. Because I truly do believe that moving forward together, which was the theme of our summit, moving forward together, that we can achieve this goal. Again, I want to thank NHTSA for their support. A big thank you to all of our speakers and panelists, moderators, and you, the attendees. We wouldn't really have a reason to do this without you, and you are so important to what we do. Our safe system will rely on everyone. And a big shout out to our summit planning team here at DMV, to Casey Thayer, and to someone who sometimes you just have to recognize one. Everybody was so dedicated to this, but to Seppo Karkanian, thank you so much for your dedication and effort. A final reminder, you're going to receive a survey at the conclusion of the session that will take you only a few short minutes to fill out, but it really is important when we plan our next year's summit. And speaking of, it's going to be in person. Finally, I promise, maybe. No, it is going to be in person on May 3rd through 5th of 2022 in Alexandria, Virginia, at the Hilton Alexandria Mark Center. Third time is the charm, but we will make it there finally. That is all from me. That is all from the summit. Stay safe. Please enjoy the rest of your day. This concludes the 2021 Virginia Highway Safety Summit.